Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at top lane for 11.4. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check out the rest of the content on the channel as well. I've done a tier list for every other role this patch. I'll have the support tier list linked at the beginning of this video. That's the most popular one on this channel. But I've done in-depth, 40, 50-minute tier lists for every single role where I talk about runes, items, places in the meta, matchup, real in-depth tier lists just like this one. It's a lot more than just showing the images and just talking about it for 5 minutes and calling it a day. So be sure to check that out if you like good depth. Come by, check out the stream. We start every night around midnight Eastern Standard Time, usually go till about 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you. If you ever miss the stream but you want to watch the replay, that's always posted on YouTube as well. And we're always adding more topical guides also. So best one tricks, how to micro better, how to macro better, individual champion guides, coaching sessions, and tons more. So be sure to check all that out on the channel. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So I don't think that the meta got shifted too much for top lane. Jungle became marginally more difficult to clear. I think it just reinforced the Udyr, Skarner, Rammus type of meta, just basically the Kim tanks that are out there. So you'll see a lot of familiar faces from last tier list, but there have been a couple that have changed and a couple of item builds that have come out. So let's go ahead and get in here. So number one, I think, is Darius. Pretty much anything that's going to be diamond or lower. This champion is just a true menace, as everyone knows. He is actually getting banned a little bit less. People are using bans on other things. He's just so difficult to deal with the current atmosphere of items and runes that are out there. So he'll typically take Ghost. And then the new Stride Breaker is something that you'll find on a lot of the top tier champions. This item is just really, really strong, especially after they nerfed Gore Drinker. This became kind of the de facto king item of top lane, I think. It's got the attack damage, of course. It's got the health, just like Gore Drinker, and the ability haste. It does have the little bit of extra attack speed, which is nice, but it has that gap closer, right? So it allows some of these meatball champs that just need to get on there, where the limiting factor and how they're usually balanced is around their lack of mobility. This gives them the mobility, gives them the extra slow. The extra movement speed also passive off of the mythic is really nice. Gives about 11% or 12, flat movement speed based off your other mythic. So it's just perfect. And it gives you that extra little bit of burst damage to get them low. And the slow, and it's on a 20-second cooldown that's reduced by ability haste. So just pretty much everything. Stride Breaker is just absolutely perfect for Darius with Ghost, with Flash. If either one of those are up, you're going to be killing him a lot. And one thing that I really like about him is he matches up so well against squishy champions and tanks, because that bleed does a ton of damage. And then, of course, the ultimate is a true damage execute. So that means that whether he's up against Malphite top lane or Riven top lane or whatever, he's going to have some game if you can play him well. His floor is, pretty low. You can be a very effective Darius without much practice. There are some, tricky interactions when you get to higher levels of play, like making sure that you're hitting them with the outside part of your Q and make sure they don't gap close onto you. So, like, at Masters level plus, stuff like Camille and Riven and Irelia, like, they can all beat Darius. But at the lower brackets, people just are not going to have the skill to be able to outplay just your raw power. So we're going to go Stride Breaker. Sterix is another item that's, like, super OP right now. They did nerf it, I think, last patch a little bit. They took, like, 100 shield off of it. Doesn't matter. Still has attack damage, health, and basically gives you a shield for, like, 40% of your max health. So very, very strong item, and then he can also get Dead Man's Plate with that to run around. So it's pretty much like you never even have to get an offensive item. You can just go almost sheer tank with just Stride Breaker and Sterix, which, let's be honest, are basically tank items anyways with damage on them. And he just takes over, and he doesn't really fall off either. Like some of these other early game bullies out there, like Pantheon, he just keeps going up and up and up, as far as the chart goes. So pretty linear build, not a lot of options for this first couple of picks. It's always Stride Breaker, and then I think that Sterix is the next best one. That item's just so strong, but you could go Dead Man's or get a Bramble Vest if you needed to top lane. But super strong, not a ton needs to be said about him. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Okay, next one up here, Garen. Now, this one might surprise a couple of people if you haven't really been paying attention. He doesn't get talked about as much. He actually gets played about the same amount as Darius now. Darius used to have a higher play rate, and then Garen was like at 2 or 3% win rate. But I guess more people are figuring out about Garen. But he's just kind of like Darius 2.0, right? He just is going to take Stridebreaker. Now, it looks like people might be trying Stormrazor second on him. I haven't seen that build a ton. It does have a high win rate, but much less of a play rate. I would probably either just go Sterix or Deadman's. Now, Deadman's is a pretty good option on him because he's better at split pushing than Darius is because he has that movement speed on his Q. And he does take towers pretty quickly with the empowered Q to do the extra damage to the towers. But he can actually opt in a Trinity. He doesn't need the gap closer as much as Darius does, but you still probably want Stridebreaker just because it's just a super strong item to begin with. So yeah, he's got the spin to win. His execute, he doesn't get the resets like Darius does, but I think there's even less counterplay potential to him because he can just run up and spin to win. He doesn't even have to hit any kind or measure any sort of arc radiuses on his spin or anything like that like Darius does. So really strong stat check champion. At higher elos, yes, he can be countered, but he's difficult to deal with. Like, he's hard to gank. He can run away really well. He can break slows, I think, with his W. Takes towers fast, split pushes fast. Not amazing in team fights, but he is okay. I don't know if people are still going Cleaver on him at all or not. It is an option. A lot of people don't do it. But if you do have to show up to team fights, if split pushing doesn't seem like a good option, you can get Cleaver and stack it up really quickly for your team. So he does have a couple of options in there, but yeah, same drill as Darius, just really meatball tank type of champion that benefits very heavily from the Stridebreaker, does tons of damage. He does get to take Ignite if he wants that or Teleport, so he doesn't have to opt into Ghost, but nevertheless, going to be super strong. And ChoGath is kind of the first one that I think people might disagree with at the top if you're talking about Diamond and lower. But he's low-key been super, super strong. I know that LS was kind of memeing on him, like, who's picking this champion? Why is he good top lane when they nerfed him a couple of patches ago? And I was honestly a little confused as well until I looked into it. And I'm like, wow, like, his stats are very good. He's got one of the highest win rate top lane right now of, like, mainstream top laners. It's pretty high. There are... Okay, I was about to say, I don't know what I clicked on before. Top lane. So of things that are picked like 1% or more, he's like right up there. He's just number 2 only to Garen in terms of 1% representation top laners. But he just brings a lot to the table, right? Like, he has pretty good sustained damage, right? He's got percentage damage on his E, which also applies a slow, so that makes him pretty good against tanks. I don't know why. Okay, there we go. Which makes him pretty good against tanks on a low cooldown. They did nerf this, but it's still going to be pretty strong. And then he brings a lot more CC to the table than either Garen or Darius. So you've got the Q for the knockup, which isn't affected by tenacity. It's a good setup for stuff like Yasuo, like Samira, anyone that cares about that knockup. He has an AoE silence, which is annoying to deal with in fights. And then, of course, he has his Feast, which is, basically very similar to Garen and Darius, like really huge... true damage execute. And then he's a very good Chem tank user, so it looks like a lot of people are going Frostfire. I'm not a ChoGath expert, but I would probably go Chem tank, just because if you don't remember back in the day, Righteous Glory was a huge reason why ChoGath was really strong maybe 3 or 4 seasons ago, just because he can run in, get access to that back line, get that knock-up, and then just chomp them. Because they don't have to be low health to execute. It's just straight up does a billion damage on somebody with that chomp. So I think that's a pretty good combination with him. And then he works very well with either Thornmail or Force of Nature because he's going to have so much just innate health in his kit just from his feasts that getting those resistances work really well. And this is going to give you that extra movement speed if you do have Force of Nature against some of those AP threats. And then, of course, Thornmail is just one of the strongest tank items in the game because there's so much healing still going around. So fantastic champ. He just brings a little bit more CC to the table, a little bit better team fight presence than Darius or Garen. So very strong option up there. And then the last one that I'll throw up here is Gnar, and I know that LS, once again, I just mentioned LS because he's one of the more popular commentators that also does tier lists, and he's very contrarian with a lot of his picks. He likes to talk about things that are clearly very good in pro that he doesn't think are good in pro, and so on and so forth. But I know that he really hates Gnar, but Gnar actually has a pretty good win rate in pro overall. Well, we'll leave it up here for now. I meant to close out some of these tabs, but he's the third highest presence with a 55% win rate on 11.3, so he definitely is very good in pro. He's picked a lot. I think he's the most picked one. So literally the most picked champion with a 55% win rate in pro. Obviously going to be good. But even in solo queue, his win rate's pretty good. It's 52%. And usually Gnar, even when he's good in pro, he's not that great in solo queue because people don't play around his ult well enough. But people have figured out, hey, look, Stride Breaker's a really strong item. Maybe we could even get that on Gnar instead of Gore Drinker. Turns out very good because this is actually really strong in mini Gnar form as well as mega Gnar form. And that's what I think makes this so much better than Gore Drinker, because Gore Drinker is really kind of worthless on mini Gnar. But this gives you that extra attack speed, so you can trigger your hyper more often, you can kite better, still gives you all the other stuff, attack, damage, ability, haste, all those things that he likes. But you can also use that lunge to run people down, right? So you can, gap close onto him and stick to him easier, so you can just keep running him down and harassing him. And the big sort of claim to fame with Gnar is he's pretty much a ranged bully in the laning phase that can also turn into a really good, hardcore engaged tank. So yes, there are still some of those problems where if you end up popping Mega Gnar and the enemy team just disengages and tries not to fight, then yes, that's a problem. You do have to learn how to sort of try to time your fights around your Mega Gnar transformation. But a lot of people just fight you in Mega Gnar anyways, especially lower elo brackets. They won't back up. They won't try to bait you into using it early. So I still think it's going to be pretty good. And even if you do have mini Gnar, like I said, he can still do some stuff now. They've buffed his mini Gnar stuff a lot, right? Where that boomerang and hyper actually do some pretty respectable damage. So, if you're going Stride Breaker plus Sterix, you're still going to be, decent even in mini Gnar form. So obviously you do want to be mega for the team fights, but he's just that combination, like I mentioned before, just great early game bully, has percentage damage on his hyper, really can bust up a lot of melee champs, very difficult to get a hold of. He's got the boomerang for the slow, he's got the W to jump away, he takes fleet footwork, I guess, in the top lane. I would think he would take something other than fleet, but that does seem to be the best one, because that does allow you to kite out some of these melee picks. So just really strong champion overall. Does require a little bit more skill to him than some of the other ones in terms of positioning and timing your ult, but really, really powerful. Fits in almost any team comp. Very blind pickable. Okay. And then moving down the list a little bit here, I think that Malphite is still going to be pretty good. I think that his matchups into these guys are probably not great. I didn't look at the win rates. But he's just probably the best if you're auto-filled top and you just want to play someone who's going to be effective even if you get behind. It's going to be a great team fight presence. Then Malphite's obviously going to offer that huge hitbox on his ult, good knock-up, tons of damage, upfront damage, I should say. His sustained damage is obviously going to be really weak, but just that burst, whenever you just press R and then, EQ auto, it's going to do a lot of damage. And it looks like people are going Sunfire. I could definitely see an argument maybe for Frostfire Gauntlet just to hold him still a little bit more after you land it, but it's just pretty much pick your tank item of choice, slap on a Thornmail, play some Engage, and you're good to go. In the top lane a lot of times. What is his win rate against? Let me see. Weak against in the top. Yeah, so not great against Garen, not great against ChoGath or Maokai. We'll mention in a second. So some of the other tanks are just going to kind of outscale him a little bit. Not great in a Darius. Not horrible, but not fantastic either. Looks like he does have a pretty decent matchup into Gnar. But yeah, decent champ overall. So yeah, not a ton to say about him. Just slap on his tank. Now I don't know. I would almost rather play Maokai than Malphite. Like Malphite, the thing that I have him a little bit higher just because he's easier to really maximize his kit, where it's just literally just press R, just try not to die too much, keep it under a 50 CS deficit, and just show up to team fights later. You can't split push at all. Maokai does bring a little bit more to the table. Obviously, if you've been watching my stream at all, I play him a ton in support. I think he's an amazing support right now. But I think he's a very undervalued top laner right now as well. He does have a 52% win rate in top. Not as high of a pick rate, but he just synergizes really well with some of these items also. Like, he can go Sunfire. I think you could actually go Turbo Chem Tank and serve as a primary engage. Yeah, that's what most people are getting. So I'm not sure why they're saying to take Sunfire when it's less picked and 6% less play rate. But yeah, Turbo Chem Tank is awesome with Maokai, because that's really one of the major limiting factors of him as a tank in the top lane is his engage is a little shaky, right? Your ult is super slow and your W only has like 525 range, so it's just not really designed for an engage. But the Turbo Chem Tank allows you to run in and engage with that W. And if you start your ult first and then you run in with the Chem Tank, you grab them with your W, the chain CC is going to be like 3.5 seconds. And no one's going to be able to help peel that person because they're all going to be getting hit by the other brambles. So just fantastic engage with the Turbo Chem Tank. He does have very high percentage damage in his kit with the seeds. If people want to trade with you in lane, just have a seed waiting in a bush and just hang out near the bush. They're not going to be able to trade. And then late game, you can just start spamming out some of those seeds and really giving your team some extra objective control. Now, with this build, you're not going to have as much mana as you might with some of your other builds. You're probably just going to take Aftershock. Mana Flow Ban does help out with that some. I think that Frozen Heart's probably pretty undervalued. Yeah, it's like a 58% win right now. It's not played very often, but it's something to consider. You're probably just going to take Thornmail because most team comps are overloading on AD, and the Grievous Wounds is really good. And just like not spam your seeds as much. But you know, that's going to be solid. And then Spirit Visage is another one that's pretty good because your passive does heal you for a decent chunk, and it does give you some magic resist to help you out. So he brings a lot to the table. Like I said, just tons of CC, pretty good engage, like decent sustain, good utility with the seeds. He's just kind of almost everything you'd want in a tank. His damage profile is going to be lower. Like, he's probably not going to be able to slam and dominate the lane, you know, as much as something like a Garen or a Darius, and he's not going to be able to bully people as much as Gnar, which is why I have him down a little bit. But if you're just looking for a utility tank, once again, you're auto-filled, or you have confidence that the rest of your team has a lot of damage, I think that he could be a pretty good option. Okay, and then Wukong, the perennially underrated top laner that I almost always have in Tier 2. He's pretty much always got a 52 or 53% win rate, works really well with a lot of the items right now. Still going to get Gore Drinker, still going to get Ravenous Hydra. Lots of outplay potential with his clone where you can block skill shots, you can fake people out in team fights. It's very tricky, and then he's got a pretty good amount of utility too, right? He's got the Crushing Blow, which lowers the armor for everybody, not just for you, but it allows your entire team to crack through that Darius or that ChoGath or whatever a lot easier. It's percentage armor pen, which is really nice. And then you can opt into something like a Black Cleaver if you want to give that extra armor pen to your team as well. So those are all decent choices. It looks like Stridebreaker actually could be decent on him as well. But most people are either going to go for a Divine Sunder or a Gore Drinker, it looks like these days. And then Steric's always a great choice. Ravenous is nice because it does give you that extra little bit of survivability and the raw damage as well for your ultimate. However, it looks like, you know, Cleaver is also a good option, although not picked as much. So he has several different build options that you can go with. There are some matchups that can be kind of tough, but he does bring a lot of great team utility with the double knockup and with the potential for multiple forms of armor shred. So I think that he can be pretty good if you're solid on him. And then Renekton is another one that sees a lot of pro play. I think his win rate's not... No, it actually is pretty good in pro. 67%, so great in pro. And he did get nerfed on this patch, but I think he's probably still pretty good. His win rate's not going to be as strong as some of the other ones. He has a bit more index towards the early game, so I think he's going to fall off a bit more late game. I didn't check the chart. Yeah, it kind of falls off a little bit late game, but excellent early game bully into some of these champions, like some of these fighters that are going to be squishier, your Camille's, your Rivens, your Fioras, that type of stuff. If you can outplay them, I think you can beat them in the laning phase. Who is he weak against? So yeah, it looks like a pretty bad matchup into Gnar, as Gnar can kite you out. Some of the other big tanks, the Malphites and the ChoGaths, can just stack a bunch of armor early against you, so that's kind of tough. Darius, not amazing. But then, you know, once you get into these skill type of champs early on, then he can be a bully that just kind of slams the door in their face and just doesn't let them scale. Just kind of takes over the game from early on. So one of the strongest bullies right there with Gnar at suppressing some of these fighter champs in the top lane. Excellent burst damage in the lane, goes for the Gore Drinker plus Sterix, and is a really nice tank in team fights because not only is he just really tanky, but he heals a ton off of his empowered Q, off of his ultimate, or off of the Gore Drinker, and then he gets a lot of extra health off of his ultimate, and he can you know, double jump and get to that back line and maybe even one shot or do a lot of damage to a mage or an AD carry. So overall, pretty strong champion, good in team fights, good bully in the laning phase. Gonna get outscaled if you don't take over, so you gotta be a little careful with him, but he could be good. Okay, and Camille. Now, if this was pro, Camille I would have at the very top, but because it's solo queue, I've got her just a little bit lower, and this is where you're gonna get into, like, if you one-trick these 3 champs, or you're just really good on them, or it's higher elo, I think that you could definitely make an argument for Camille, Riven, and Irelia to all be S tier, but they are very difficult to play, and they do have really bad matchups if you're not great on them into these champs. Like, Darius and Garen are just going to absolutely destroy Riven and Camille in, like, a Silver 2 game, for example, the vast majority of the time. So you just have to really sweat super, super hard to win those matchups a lot of times. And, you know, the Silver and Gold elo, they're just not going to be bringing the Gatorade most of the time, unfortunately. But the potential is there, right? If you're really good on them, then they definitely can take over. Now, Camille did get a little bit of a nerf on the W, which I thought was kind of laughable, and that's what a lot of people were saying as well. It did actually impact her win rate quite a bit, though. It knocked her down like 1.5 or 2%, I think, since last patch. Like you can see here, definitely trending down on the win rates at all elo brackets. Especially higher elo brackets over the last couple of days. Looks like she's kind of fallen off a cliff there. So that may have mattered more than people think it did. Her win rate obviously scales up over time. So she is hard to play, and she has very expensive items that take a while to come online. So usually she's either going to go for Trinity Force or Divine Sunder, depending on if she's against tanks or if she's against squishies. And then you're typically going to go Ravenous Hydra, although I suppose you could go Sterix second. Once you get those 2 items, you definitely can completely melt tanks, and you're going to be a queen of split pushing. But you got to get there first, and that's like, you know, 6,000 or 7,000 gold into the game, which is going to take a while, unless you're just completely dominating them early, which is kind of hard to do if you're facing a bunch of people that are just going to be stacking cloth armors, bramble vests, stride breakers, Sterix, you know, all that stuff. It's just going to make your job really difficult for the first, you know, 20 or 25 minutes of the game. Now, she does have some different utility to help her out, different abilities. So the primary one is the ult, allows you to outplay like a lot of their key abilities by making you untargetable, and then allows you to lock them down. So if your jungler comes up, you actually can virtually guarantee some kills. So that is really nice. And then you can split push and get away very easily with your E. Now people are not maxing hookshot anymore, and I think it has a long cooldown, so you're not going to have as much mobility as you used to have with it, but it's still there as an option. And then your Q does that true damage to help you cut through the tanks later, and also is an auto attack reset that helps you take towers, you know, dragons, things like that pretty quickly. So good champ, very high skill cap, difficult to pilot, but she can be really solid. Now, speaking of difficult champs, Riven is even harder, but she has a higher win rate right now, and she is off the radar a little bit more too. Most people aren't talking about Riven. Analytics does have her as S+, but a lot of people aren't playing her. She's only 7% versus Camille's 10%. She's never banned, hardly. And she's just basically like the perfect one-trick champ. I talk about her all the time anytime I do a new and updated one-trick video. She just has really high mobility, high burst, good survivability with that shield, and just a ton of outplay ability with her mobility, with the shield, with the stun. She's just fantastic. And even in team fights, if you're really good on her, she can completely just wipe the floor with team fights. If you see a great place to, you know, flash in there, get the stun, land your third Q, and then just like blow everybody away with your ultimate. So Lots and lots of potential there. Really good with certain items, like particularly Gore Drinker's pretty good on her. I think Stride Breaker was okay, but you kind of do want that heal just because it buys you more time to get another shield, with your E. So I think that's probably better. Although win rate wise, Prowler's Claw, it does look like it could be a decent choice. Stride Breaker actually seems horrible for times. I take that back. Maybe I was thinking of somebody else. But there are a couple of options, but most of you still just want to go Gore Drinker with her. And then you do have some options after that. It looks like Essence Reaver is statistically the best one to go for. It's a little weird because Critical Strike is not fantastic because most of your damage comes from your abilities, which can't crit, like your Q and your E. But I think it's just the extra Sheen proc that you get. You also don't gain any benefit from the mana regen off of this. But I'm pretty sure it's just because it has attack damage, ability haste, and also gives you extra burst with a Sheen proc. That's not a mythic item. So you can't get like Trinity and Gore Drinker or Divine Sunder and Gore Drinker. So this is one of the only... In fact, it might be the only Sheen item that's not a mythic. I'd have to fact check that. I don't remember for sure. But it's certainly something that adds a lot of extra burst to your kit. So it just depends. Cleaver is also good. It just does a lot for your team. You are going to be facing tanks very often with her, so it shreds the armor for you, but it also shreds it for your entire team, like I mentioned earlier on Wukong and some other people. So that is pretty good utility. And that's going to give you the health, attack damage, just a lot of different things that you would want in her kit. So difficult to play, but really strong right now. Did get a buff. As you can see, her win rate went up and her pick rate went up a ton over the last couple of patches because I think they lowered the cooldown on her E by like 2 seconds, which is very significant because that's her shield and that's her mobility. So that was a really, really big buff for Riven. Yeah, good high skill cap champ. And then Irelia is one of the last ones that I'll mention in depth, and I'll see if I can keep this under 30 minutes. Super high skill cap champ, but she's probably, I think, one of the most like Smurf pub stomp champs. Just because you can stack up her passive, like, even at level 1 and all in and kill people. She just has so much mobility. She can just jump around everywhere, especially if it's in the middle of a minion wave. And then she's got the stun. She has the disarm, which I think is just maybe a slow off of her ultimate. And this is really strong. Now, her items are a bit weird because she does go Blade of the Ruined King. And she does have an exceptionally low win rate, one of the lowest in the top lane position, period. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, so her build path is a little weird where she just ends up getting Blade of the Ruined King plus Trinity. But nevertheless, going to be really strong if you're good on her. You just got to, once again, put in the time and lose a lot of games while you're learning her. But can be solid. And then Fiora did get a buff on this patch. Her win rate did go up a little bit. You could easily put her in A class if you're very good on her. I just have her a bit lower just because she does have a bit of lower mobility and like less utility than some of the other champs. Like she doesn't have any sort of stuns. I guess if you time your riposte correctly with the W, it can be a stun. And that's really what it comes down to with Fiora is how well do you riposte, right? If you can riposte a Malphite ult or a ChoGath feast or a Renekton stun, you can definitely take over the game and dominate with Fiora. But if you can't get your riposte timing correct, then she's going to feel really bad. So a lot of it just comes down to the skill and how fast your reflexes are, how low your ping is to be able to play that riposte correctly. But pretty strong champ overall. And then Volibear, excellent Kim tank user, can just run at people, do a lot of damage. He's got the shield, he has some percentage health, he has his ult, which allows him to get onto the back line and disrupt the AD carries if you want to. So he doesn't have quite as much damage, I don't think, as some of the other tanks out there. He doesn't have as much damage as the Darius and Garen, but also doesn't have as much CC as the Malphite and the Maokai. But I think he's a decent option if you're good on him. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Rumble. Ton of AoE magic damage. You do, if your team needs that, if you have a ton of AD on your team, I think he's one of the better AP options in the top lane. I'd prefer him to Kennen. I know some pros have been playing Kennen. Kennen might be a little bit better at harassing in the early game, but I think Rumble just brings so much damage to team fights that he's just going to be super strong. And I guess that's about it. Like I said, I do want to end this in 30 minutes. I think Gangplank and Rise can be super strong if you're very good on them, but they need a lot of gold, they need a lot of items, and they need a lot of skill. So I have them down just a little bit lower. And then in the very bottom, I just wouldn't play these champs. I think that like Jason, Akali are just too difficult to leverage, and the other ones just don't have enough stats to make it work. Anyways, that's going to be it. Have a good day. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.